So his usual code copy. And original code was for Spring Boot 2, so I had to change slightly. So not huge changes, but there are some changes around. Get from version control, and it is 32, I believe, and not in Angular folder. So Spring Boot. SuperHeroes. That's the name of the program. I didn't choose this name. This is how it was there. We could rename it to SuperHero Data Service. That it's probably longer, but I just keep original name. Trust the project. Like in previous textbook examples, it is not original code because I had to change a little bit. It is project created from scratch, but majority of the code was copy-pasted from the textbook what I showed, and it is a chapter, chapter 5. So how did I generate this code? I opened build Gradle to show what was used. I selected Spring Boot 3. I entered Java 17, because Java 17 is required for Spring Boot 3. Then, just because I looked through code, I knew which libraries to use, because by looking through the code, we can know what is necessary for the code to compile, right? So I selected H2 database and GPA to access the database. Original code was using GPA, but not H2 database. It was using PostgreSQL. So in order to use PostgreSQL, we need to install Postgres server separately and run it. We already did it for MySQL, and later we will run this example with MySQL. There is no point of installing Postgre in addition to MySQL. There are features in MySQL that in Postgre that don't exist in MySQL, because Postgre is far bigger system and it has more options, but this program is not using fast options of Postgre. So this code can be just used with MySQL. So I selected a GPE and H2 for simplicity. Originally it was Postgre. Web services, it is the option used when I created project for dice rolling. Remember dice roller service project when we had the JavaScript as the front end and controller, RESTful controller on the back end providing RESTful service. In that case, I used the RESTful controller because data didn't come from the database, and it was the simplest option just to return object, Java object that was converted to JavaScript automatically. And when I was explaining that program, I said that we can implement RESTful services even from databases the same way, but it's not the shortest option. And this textbook is using that option. When data is coming from the database, but it is not served as Spring Data REST repositories. The data is served from REST controller. So it is not the shortest option, definitely. Why do they use it? I assume it is just to show that it's also possible. Okay. There is no other reason, probably. Also, we would use this approach if we need to convert data. So database is giving us some data, and we need to change it before we serve it. This would be the option. They don't change the data in any significant way, so I assume that they show option so you can use it if you need to change data. So I selected web services. I selected validation because this project is doing validation for data that is coming from web before it is saved in database. What is this option? This is not selectable when you create your project. As you notice that this is not Spring framework library, it is something else which is available and it will work with Spring framework. So it is extra library and it is not essential to this project. We can add about 10 lines of code in order to avoid using this library. But I didn't bother to change that part because I want to show that it's possible to use this library. It's not bad, although it's not essential to this project, but maybe you may choose it for another project. And this mapper library, model mapper library. And again, this is easy to replace with brute force code, like about 10 lines of code, just hard-coded. And it's not a big deal. So it is for illustration that such library exists and you can use it. Originally, this project contained Lombok and I deleted Lombok. So I changed code such way that it's not using Lombok. Why? I don't know. Just on Monday, when I was explaining this code on Monday in another section, this code contained Lombok and I realized that it's harder to explain because it's producing some code automatically. So I decided, okay, I will just remove it. Okay? We already had Lombok in some examples, so it shouldn't be a problem. Okay? Additionally, I already mentioned that this project contains controller, which is RESTful controller, so REST controller. That is serving data from the methods, and methods do have mappings. In our simple example with dice roller, we had only get mapping because that's the only method that was provided by the given controller, and the only method that was necessary in that context. In this case, service is receiving data, changing, deleting data, inserting data, replacing data. So in order to address those options, authors created methods, not just get entire list. So we have request mapping and heroes. So this project is serving data about some, I don't know, imaginary heroes, probably. I don't know, just based on the name, I created fake data. It didn't contain fake data, so I created one. I inserted two people, Superman and Spider-Man, so with winning heroes. Actually, project was called SuperHeroes, but data type was anti-heroes, anti-hero entity. So I removed anti because I don't know any anti-heroes, so I just rename it anti-heroes to heroes, so now it is only two heroes, Superman and Spider-Man in the data. So next. Remember that when we have request mapping with something on some address on top of controller, this will create virtual folders for other addresses listed below. We had it in Spring Student Data 2, this kind of, right? And we also, I think we also had it in Dice Roller. We had API folder at the top, an additional folder for serving data for dice rolling. Right? So the same. Let's look at, by the way, it's only one controller, because program is simple and there's only one entity, so it's only one table. So let's look at the options available from this controller. A controller is mapped to API version 1 heroes. So let's talk about version 1. What does it mean? Just looking at this, we can realize it's just a folder name, nothing special. It's not a version. It's just a folder name. Call it V1, and we assume that it's version 1. Right? Why do we need this V1 folder? It is actually quite smart idea. Imagine that you have a service that is serving data to some mobile application. You release your mobile application, and later you want to create a beta mobile version, and perhaps that is using different service. Slightly different service from the same database. Maybe optimize it one, whatever. So you may need some other addresses to serve your second version of your app, right? So it makes sense to create address like V1, V2, right, for second version of your app, mobile app. So first version of a mobile app can be just, people can continue using first version, and second will be version of the data format will be available for second version of your app. So it is to avoid conflicts between variants of data that we serve. Next, our hero controller, this controller is using the constructor injection to inject hero service. Hero service, it's a data service serving the data like coming from database, from table heroes, defined in hero entity. So it is injected to controller. Now, get mapping doesn't have any address here. It means it is serving data from heroes folder, right? Because nothing to add to heroes folder. Okay. So what does it send? It sends find all heroes, right? Table of heroes. Then table of heroes /ID, it would be hero find by ID. ID in this program, it is not integer, it is UUID, it's universal ID. Yeah. You're probably familiar with this type from your C# course. It's used a lot there. It is also available in Java. It's the first program where we have it, but it's around, it's used. So if we open hero entity, we will see that I created table name heroes. It didn't have table name, so I inserted this. I added this line. Also, first name is validated before it is saved into database. So if you put something on top of data field inside of entity, this validation will be applied before data is inserted into database. And if it doesn't validate, it will throw exception. And then we have a first name, last name, house, I don't know, known as probably nickname, and created add. It's a string, which is date formatted into this format. Okay. So it is table of heroes. So in resources, application properties, I made H2 console available, so we will see table of 2 heroes. Where does this data is coming from? The data is coming from data initialization, similar to a pet example, pet sitters example. So I created component for system to create this object, and when this object is created, it will execute post-construct method, after constructor. So I created Superman and added to hero service, and the same data about Spider-Man added to hero service. So this is how I initialize the database with 2 entities. So let's go back to controller. So this is where it's coming from. This is ID. Get by ID. Remember when we delete by ID, we said send delete request, in this case delete mapping, as opposite to get mapping, to address with ID, table with ID. So it is calling hero service remove hero by ID. Right. Post mapping. When post is inserting new data, and data is traveling inside of request body. Remember when we played with my student data service example created from copy-paste in front of you, right? We inserted data inside of request body and we send it with post request. So this is how to receive data from request body. You market it with request body, and it is validated. Okay. So this program contains two validations places for the same thing. So they show that we can validate incoming data as well, not just data before you insert it into database, incoming data as well. So this is applied for hero DTO object. Please notice that hero DTO object, data transfer object, is used not just in insert, right? It's also used, you see, as return type here, right? As list of that. Okay. So they have two kinds of objects. One for RESTful service interface and one for database interface. We already saw this approach in student data 1 and student data 2 example, right? In those examples, I created two kinds of objects. One was for database, that was called student entity, and the other kind was called student form, that was used to insert data into templates and to gather user input. It is exactly the same approach. In the given example, authors of the program created two similar objects, hero DTO and hero entity, that are quite similar. But potentially they may contain different data because we may decide to change something when we copy the data. I will go back to copying data, but first I will finish this explanation, this one. Put mapping is replacing data at specific address. Also, ID is a path variable, like here, you see path variable. It's part of the address line. And data is received in request body, and it is validated automatically. So unlike examples from the above, this is a little bit more complicated because they want to show how to throw bad request exception, how to throw bad request response. So they decided to match ID in the address line with ID received inside of the object, JavaScript object. And obviously, if they don't match, it's something wrong with the ID. Right? It shouldn't be so. So they decided to check if ID from the address line equal to ID inside of the receiving object. And if they don't match, not equal, right? They throw response status exception, HTTP status, bad request, and error message. Okay. So they're showing us how to reply with error, right? Response status exception, that status that something is wrong, like, and message. Okay. So if this does not happen, so if exception is not thrown, they call hero service update hero. Right. What about other errors? What about for error? For example, if we try to get data from hero service /ID, but this ID doesn't exist, it is supposed to be for error, right? HTTP request not found for. Where it is coming from? Originally from nowhere, because it didn't exist. So I changed their code. So, and surprisingly, fix was very simple. So they created exception. That exception was customized, and they call it not found exception. runtime exception with constructor in the message. All right. So they created not found exception that extending runtime exception, but exception name not found exception by itself is not creating for error. In order to convert this thrown exception into status not found, it must be this line on top of this exception. Or it should be some other code that is converting this exception to status not found that were not present in the code. So I found the simplest possible way, in my opinion, to fix this issue, to return for error when not found exception happens. So, and approach is to write add response status HTTP status not found on top of declaration of the exception. So when system is throwing this exception, it will be also code somewhere in Spring Boot, and response will be set to HTTP status not found for. So this is how to deal with not found. By looking through the logic of the program, it could be only two possible issues. It's either not found or some bad request. Right? If you do not specify not found here, when this exception happens, it will be returned as bad request, which is not correct, because if data is not found, it's not necessarily bad request. So by default, when we tried to look for data that doesn't exist, it was showing bad request. And this is the fix of the issue. So controller, right? I think I explained it till the end, but I didn't explain hero service that is serving the data. This code is not original. I edited it. And what did I change? I changed the place where they copy hero entity into DTO and DTO to hero entity. If you remember student data examples, the copying of form and entity objects one way and backwards were done inside of the service. In my opinion, this makes code shorter. They use a different approach. They copied these objects directly inside of controller. That made controller code longer. So I decided to experiment and move that code from controller into service to see, is this actually making code shorter? Definitely it made controller shorter. And surprisingly, it's also made service not so long. So altogether, it is shorter code. So I decided to keep it. So if you compare this example with textbook, they copy these methods, they copy these objects inside of controller, but they copy this inside of service. So this is difference. So let's open service and see what happens there. So service is marked as service to make it injectable into constructor. And it also has two objects, private objects that are injected into constructor using constructor injection. And what is hero repository? Hero repository, it is default GPA repository that provides like save list operations like retrieve list, delete one, save one, this standard way, right? And going back to the service, what is mapper? And I already discussed it. There is a library that is added to the project, not by selection, but by just copy pasting. And this is mapper library. And I said that library is not essential. We can replace it by just writing code. And it is indeed not essential. If we look up where it is used, this library is used to copy, you see, copy hero entity object into hero DTO, and copy hero DTO object into hero entity. So mapper is creating hero entity class with copied data. So it is mapping property names from one object into property names of the other object, and if they are matching, it is copying data. So this is how mapper library works. Can we just do the same as in student data? Sure, because in student data it was get first name, set first name, get last name, set last name, get something, set something. How long it would be? One, two, three, four, five, 6 lines of code. So it's not such a huge deal. Right? 6 lines of code for one method and 6 lines of code to copy it backwards. Right? So 12 lines of code. Not such a big deal. Right? But now we know how to do it automatically. So speaking about hero DTO, it is the same kind of object, except it's not entity, and it has also validation. Right? It's like a form object. In form object, my validation messages were outside, but I could do exactly the same. I could stick it validation messages inside of student form. It would also work. I just decided not to clutter it. Okay? And they put it together. So let's go back to hero service, because I didn't finish to explain this. So they created 2 convert methods from entity to DTO and from DTO to entity. And they use it regularly because they had to, now we need to copy this in every method. Right? They also created helper method, and this helps a lot. This helper method helps a lot. So this is probably a good idea to discuss this one. What does it do? The created method find or throw for given ID. How does it behave? You provide ID. It will do query by using find by ID. And it will return optional. It's a wraparound object. And it could be empty. Why it could be empty? Because if you give ID that doesn't exist, it will be empty container. After this, they call or else throw. How it behaves. If container is not empty, it will give you content, which is hero entity. And if it is empty, it will execute this code to throw not found exception. That will be called by the system and generate not found status response. All right? What would happen if this line is not present? It will still throw exception, but different kind. But idea is to throw specific exception because we could write status on top of that exception, so it is correctly, status is correctly returned. So this is the helper method to retrieve one object by ID, which was also throw exception that will return 4 error code. So let's see how they apply this method. So list of hero DTO. I had a similar issue when I was converting list of entities into list of forms. And I addressed this issue brute force. I created empty list, and I ran it loop through given list, and I was converting each object and insert it into that empty list. And eventually, after loop is done, I got list of converted listings then, so I returned that. They decided to go fancy. And fancy approach is to use map. And if you took Android course, you realize that we use it map a lot in Android course because we use it Kotlin, and map it's a method of a list. So we can call a method of a list, map, provide function that will be applied to every item in the list to create another list. So this is how it works in Kotlin, because map, it's a method of a list. Unfortunately, in Java, map is not a method of a list. So you cannot call repo find all map. Such method doesn't exist. So they had to go around it. So they got a list of entities. They converted to stream of hero entity. But stream has a method map. So they apply given function to the items of the stream. So they got stream of hero DTO after that, you see? Stream of hero DTO, and they convert stream of hero DTO into list of hero DTO by calling collect. Okay. It is longer, but typically Java code is longer than Kotlin, so it's not a surprise. All right, so find hero by ID. So find or throw by ID is giving hero entity, and I'm converting this to DTO, convert to DTO. So it is returning DTO. Next, remove hero, and this will throw exception if it's not found, right? We already saw. What about this? Remove hero by ID. Where I'm looking for the object by ID because I need to throw exception if it doesn't exist. Because delete is supposed to return for error if you try to delete that is not there. So this will take care of it. So I got the object if it exists, and I call delete on that object. So it will be deleted if it is present. So add hero. This is tricky because post supposed to return new data. So given method add hero supposed to give you new data that will be returned by controller. So I receive hero DTO, but I need to convert it to entity because repo save expect entity. A repo save will give you also entity, but I need to return DTO from controller. So I convert it to DTO, so my controller is not handling entities. So all objects are used in the controller are DTOs, data transfer objects. Okay. Update hero. Update hero, in this case, it is using save the same way, but it is coming from put. Right? So update hero, hero DTO, find or throw, so this will throw exception if it doesn't exist. Right? Repo save, this is DTO converted to entity and save it. Why it is not converted? Let's go to controller and see why it is called. Update hero, let's check. Hero controller. Post hero, put hero. So put hero is not returning. Is it supposed to return if it doesn't? I think it's supposed to. I think it's a mistake. So let's check it. If put supposed to return data or not. Remember our example with my student data service, right? So I will open that because service is provided by the library, so it behaves correctly. right? So I open project, call it my student service. My student data service. And into new window. All right. So it is opening. I run it. Right. I forgot what is correct behavior, so let's check it against services created by libraries, because this is probably more reliable than textbook information. So I have example for my student data service where we use it put, right? Replace one record. So I am replacing record at position 2. Don't remember who. Bart Simpson, probably. So let's get all records. Get all records. ID 2 is Lisa, right? So I'm replacing Lisa with somebody. So let's use put, which is put is the same as put here, right? You see put. And see if it is returning anything. Okay. Sending request. In the body, I have Lisa Johnson. So I'm replacing Lisa Simpson with Lisa Johnson. Okay. So I'm sending it. It does reply. So response contains data, newly inserted data. So what can we conclude? It's a bug, right? So it's supposed to return hero DTO. Newly inserted data. Since it is returning hero DTO, this should be some return type here. So I do return, all right? So it is returning newly inserted data. So this method, update hero, should return newly inserted data, right? So not newly inserted, newly replaced data, right? Newly replaced data. So I'm going back to service, and I'm fixing this one to make it return hero DTO. Okay. And I need to do something like add hero, right? So find or throw, I keep it here just to check. If it doesn't exist, it will throw exception. But I need to return what is safe is returning, which is new data. So I wrap it the same way it convert to DTO. In convert to DTO, copy, paste. Here it is, right? So I got DTO, convert to entity, save, and convert to DTO. And this exists only for checking if this exists or if data is present or not. Otherwise, it will create new entry, because save will create new entry unless you stop it, right? Here. Questions? So I fixed it. It's a bug that came from textbook, among other bugs. Okay. So I fixed it. It should work. We can try it. And so this is service, and this is control, last one. So it's supposed to return hero DTO. Questions? No. So let's run it. First, I will stop this part, because we cannot run two projects at the same time on the same port. So now I'm running hero service. So it's starting. And now let's try to send request. I already created some hero testing cases. It came from previous lesson, so I will delete this to create it from beginning. So I will delete. Where's delete? Here it is, delete. Okay. I'm creating a new collection, and I call this collection SuperHeroes, right? Okay, got SuperHeroes. Next, new add request. Get all records, right? Get all records. And what is the address to get all records? So let's look it up. It is localhost 8080 and this stuff, right? API v1 heroes. Control C. And I type localhost 8080. Column 8080 slash Control V, API v1 heroes. So let's send. And I got 2 records. Clark Kent. I don't know what house means. I assume it is his planet. So I type it Krypton and known as Superman. And 1 more record, Peter Parker, house, I don't know, planetos, and known as Spider-Man. So it does reply. Right? So we can continue with writing testing case similar to my student data service. Right? We have some data. Please notice that it doesn't contain metadata. Unlike student data service, no metadata. We can insert metadata if we include library, call it, I forgot. That is specific for metadata. HITIS. So when you create a project, file new, Spring data, you select something here as usual. There is option in web, Spring HITIS. If you include this library, it will not insert a metadata on its own. You have to add your own code related to metadata to make it work. And the textbook author decided not to do that, perhaps for simplicity, and there is another reason why. Because this project will contain automatically created documentation for the web service data, which provide more information than metadata. But perhaps it's better. This is why he decided, or she, who wrote it, they decided not to use HITIS library for metadata because they will show us how to automatically generate HTML documentation for the service. In this example, it's not a lot of documentation because it's only 1 table. But potentially it is a lot because regular web services serve a lot of data. Right? So this wasn't selected and wasn't added to the code, and this is the reason why we don't have metadata in it. Right. So let's click Save, and let's retrieve get 1 record, right? So I duplicate the last one, duplicate, and set get 1 record. So get 1 record. So I need to add some ID. Unfortunately, ID is complicated here. It's not just a number. So I need to copy this. ID, this is UUID, right? So copy, And I paste it out after heroes. Control V. All right. So I send this request and I receive data about one item, Clark Kent. So let's generate error 4 for error. So not found error. So again, I will click Save. I will duplicate last record. And why it didn't duplicate ID? Strange. Maybe I didn't click Save. Get one record contained ID. Okay, Control C, Control V. Okay, save, send. So this is working. Okay, strange. Okay, let's paste this ID and change it slightly so it's not the same. So it will be not found. So instead of 8, I put 9, assuming I mistype it. Send get request and response is status 44, status 44 not found. So it works. So I need to edit this one, last one. So I will change this, save it as not found. And I click save. So we can also test delete request, post and put similar manner, like we did it in student data example. I did try it before in another section. It works. So we need to have a break, and after break, try it as exercise for delete, post, and put. Okay. I tested this code in another section day before yesterday on Monday. Indeed work, except return code for put, I didn't notice that its return code was right, but it didn't return object, and I didn't notice that it doesn't return object. It's supposed to. So I fixed this in front of you. So it works. Next, after break, what is happening after break? I'll try to add this thing and start doing your assignment. So after break, nothing else except your assignment. Okay. And tomorrow, entire lesson will be introduction to Angular, and I know it takes entire lesson because it was in the morning today. One simple example like hello Sheridan done from scratch, and one example was cloned from GitHub. I wrote it before, and I explained everything there. And it was end of the lesson.